Tonight on Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, the Albert family back on the stand, including two key witnesses in the case.
He's out in the snow. We found him out in the snow. We don't know if he's okay.
John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never entered my house.
Good evening and welcome back to Canton Confidential. I'm J.C. Monahan.
And I'm Glenn Jones. A full day of important testimony in the Norfolk County Superior Courthouse. For the first time, we heard from former Boston police officer Brian Albert and his wife Nicole. You'll remember Brian and Nicole owned the home where Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found unresponsive on the front lawn back in 2022. Today, they testified about that night and answered questions about their family dog named Chloe and the sale of their Canton home.
Joining us live in Dedham with a full recap of today's important moments is our Kirsten Glavin. Kirsten.
That's right. Today we heard from Brian Albert himself explaining that John O'Keefe never made it inside of his house that day when everybody else did to join that party. Of course, Karen Reed's attorneys are saying he did.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
Court on Friday, beginning with Julie Albert back on the stand, answering final questions about her friendship with Courtney Proctor, the sister of lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor of Massachusetts State Police.
Shortly after you had been interviewed, you called Michael Proctor's personal cell phone number, correct?
I don't remember.
Fairview Road homeowner Nicole Albert next up. Reed's defense asking pointed questions about their dog Chloe, including why she was given away 4 months after O'Keefe was killed.
In May of 2022, 4 months after Mr. O'Keefe's death, you got rid of your family dog of 6 years.
Objection.
Oh, is that true? Is that when you got rid of your dog?
I did not get rid of my dog. I rehomed my dog.
Her husband, Brian Albert, later recounting a fun evening everyone had at their home the night before O'Keefe died.
I think people were just sitting around, having drinks. Someone had a speaker, and they were listening to music and just talking and hanging out.
Underscoring that he never saw Reed and O'Keefe show up.
After Brian left, I had gone upstairs and hung out and watched TV up in my bedroom. John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never entered my house.
The next morning, Albert says he slept through some of the police response, not knowing what had transpired.
Shock. That's how I would describe it. Everybody's reaction that morning was utter shock.
And when asked why he later sold the house, Albert stating he got a good deal during COVID.
Did the sale of your house have anything to do with what occurred there on January 29, 2020?
Absolutely not.
Leaving court, we caught up with Reed's attorneys.
It makes absolutely no sense. I slept through it. They've got a 70-pound German Shepherd 6 feet from that window that would have been barking.
They still have a different story to tell. Did John O'Keefe make it inside that house?
Of course he did. Of course he did.
Now, also new tonight, those Karen Reed supporters who want to get rid of that 200-foot buffer zone have filed a motion for reconsideration to the Supreme Judicial Court, which initially upheld the judge's decision. So we'll keep an eye on where that goes. That's the latest live here in Dedham. I'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
Developments inside and outside the courthouse. Kirsten, thank you. In studio with us tonight is criminal defense attorney Morgietta Derizier. What a night to be talking about the Karen Reed trial. My goodness. All right.
There's a lot.
We've heard from experts around this table voice some concern about the strength and sometimes even the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses. We saw Brian Albert on the stand today for quite a long time. What do you think about his strength and credibility as a witness?
You know, I think at the end of the day, he came out very confident, right? And sometimes it's not about what you say, but it's how you say it.
And you can tell it wasn't his first time.
It wasn't his first time. And I think that it didn't sound rehearsed, but he was going to stick by whatever answer he gave. And sometimes you need that from the witness, especially in a long trial. You want to make sure they're going to stick by what they're saying.
I assume when we say it's not his first time, it's because he's a police officer.
Absolutely,
and no doubt
Probably
has had
in many trials.
to testify before. One of the things we heard in opening statements, and frankly the rumor mill as well, is all about what the Alberts did not do on that morning when John O'Keefe was found. They didn't provide any aid. They didn't hear any of the sirens. They didn't come out of the house. But today, as you said, confidently, Brian gave an explanation, as did his wife, Nicole, about not hearing any of that, waking up to the sister of Nicole screaming in the bedroom, and that, frankly, by that point, John O'Keefe had been taken by ambulance, so that he was no longer even there. How did that play with you, I guess is how I would put it? Because now we're heading into a weekend, and this is what the jury was left with. There was no cross on Brian.
Yeah. Right. So cross is going to be really important on Monday. And to be quite honest, again, I said this in my first couple episodes, they left a lot of doors open. And this defense team, as we've been seeing, is going to come in and really poke a lot of holes into what has been said or not said, pretty much. And I think that it's going to be really interesting Monday.
Well, so to JC's point, this witness sounded reasonable, even though initially we were thinking some of his actions were hard to explain. Mm-hmm. As you prepare for cross as a criminal defense attorney, what kind of things are you thinking about this weekend to get yourself ready for Monday?
A lot of times it's not so much about what to think about, but what to draw attention to, right? And so they're going to be focused on a lot of the questions. And what questions can I ask this individual that's going to leave the jury thinking? And that's what it's really all about, that creating that reasonable doubt. So I'm going to assume a lot of these questions are going to be thinking questions. They may not get the answers that they want, but the jury is going to start to think.
Well, it's so interesting because Kirsten got defense attorney Jackson to say there at the end something about Chloe, the dog, being 70 pounds and would be barking loudly. I imagine that's one area we'll see them kind of knock on the door to see if there's anything there.
Because they claim basically that Chloe was asleep in the bed along with them.
Right.
So there was no feeling that anything was happening outside their house.
Yeah, absolutely. And, someone brought up the fact that that's a small point, but in a case like this, every little point is going to draw attention to the reasonable doubt. And that's what the focus has to be here. What are we missing? What are we not seeing? What doesn't make sense, right? And to a jury, you have to make it make sense.
How do you enter for Alan, let's say it's Alan Jackson or defense attorney Yannetti getting up, that they believe, and they said to Kirsten, John O'Keefe was in that house. No, they were both adamant that he was not. How do you even approach that?
Again, as a defense attorney, you may not get the 1+1 answer. It's about painting that picture, and it's about leaving that information to the jury to conclude themselves. Because the jury, they're going to be smart individuals. They may have no outside influences, but it's our job to put the pieces together for them to figure out. They're not going to say it blatantly, but if they paint enough pictures, the information will be there.
The pace of the prosecution's case has come under some criticism around this table as well. But I wonder if today that actually worked in his favor, because now we're left in a situation where a key witness was on the stand, Lally has finished with his questioning, and now the jury is left the whole weekend only thinking about the questions he had to ask of that witness, and the cross-examination had no time to deliver anything today.
I think, again, because it's going to be such a long trial, they're going to have the weekend to think about it, but it's going to be Monday morning. So that information is going to be fresh in their mind, and they're going to have time to reflect over the weekend. But the defense, I'm assuming, is going to come in very, very strong, right? And so even if they have that time, it's not going to be too far out of their mind.
We're running out of time, but can I ask a quick question? We hear a lot about the notebooks. Every time they leave, it's like, leave your notebook on the chair. Do they get to bring those home?
Generally not, because, again, you don't want any taint from the jury, right? They're going to review it when they go into deliberations or while they're sitting at trial. But
they stay there.
But they stay there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, as always.
Of course.
And we'll see her later in the half hour. Still ahead, we're talking Turtle Boy, why testimony was put on hold because of his presence in the courtroom.
Our Sue O'Connell was there, and we'll break it all down for us next. Let's talk about a name that has played a unique and in some ways oversized role in this case almost since the beginning. We're, of course, talking about Aiden Kearney, the blogger better known as Turtle Boy.
He was excused from the courtroom today during testimony. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. But first, we want to highlight how we got to this moment. Aiden Kearney is a blogger who has written about the Reed case extensively. Since the beginning, Kearney has questioned how the investigation was handled, eventually calling the allegations against Reed a cover-up. While it's unclear how Reed and Kearney first connected, state police allege Reed was feeding Kearney information about the case. They say the two communicated directly for more than 40 hours with 189 phone calls that Reed sent him autopsy and crime scene photos, as well as details from the case like a list of potential witnesses. He's allegedly had interaction with witnesses both in public and on his blog. He's also accused of working with an Avon Police Department dispatcher to illegally access motor vehicle data and then sharing it with his followers. Kearney is now facing charges of witness intimidation along with other crimes, all things Kearney denies and has pleaded not guilty. Kearney says he is a journalist and is protected by the First Amendment. His lawyer has previously said, quote, "It appears to me that there is zero evidence that Karen Reed intended or had anything to do with any witness intimidation or interference, and rather is a woman fighting for her life as a target of a murder charge." All right, joining us back in studio tonight is our courtroom insider, Sue O'Connell. Sue, let's talk about Turtle Boy, Aiden, whichever name you want to use. He was with you in the press section today.
He was with me in the press. I was right behind him, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah. And stirred up a lot of controversy and stopped testimony for a while.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is an interesting case because it's a First Amendment case and it's also a right to a fair trial case. And as we know, when you have rights that might conflict, there's no right we have that doesn't have any rules to it, right? It's not like you can just go do whatever you want. So what the judge was considering here is Karen Reed's right, or anyone's right, to a fair trial more important in this case than his right to be in the courtroom the entire time. Now, the Supreme Judicial Court has decided he is a journalist. He is allowed in that courtroom. And what Judge Cannoni also had to do was say, okay, these charges against him are not, he hasn't been convicted yet. He, too, like Karen Reed, is innocent until proven guilty. And she, I think, did a good job, as they say sometimes, splitting the baby, saying, okay, some witnesses have expressed concern about him being in the courtroom. His lawyer made the case that your feelings aren't important to the Constitution. But I think that what Cannoni is doing here is trying to protect his right as a journalist, First Amendment, Karen Reed's right for a fair trial. And he's not banned. He is not allowed in the courtroom when certain witnesses are up on the stand. And I think this is an important point that is kind of getting mixed in this. He doesn't lose his seat. So if he waits...
You've been very specific. Yep. Sorry, 10 seats only for the press, and if you leave, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get that.
Right, and she has said that if he waits in line like the rest of us and he gets in and follows the rules like he did today, he was totally well-behaved and civil and good company, I might say. If he left the courtroom because someone was testifying, his seat was saved. No one replaces him. It holds his seat. So I think this is one of those cases you're going to be mad about one side or the other, but I think she split the baby here.
I think the audience would be grateful to hear from you, Sue, the process for getting inside each and every day, because it is quite a dance just to get in the room.
Yeah, and this isn't uncommon. You see it with the Trump trials. You saw it with the Trump indictments. If you're an organized media company like NBC, BZ, CVB, Fox, all the other stations, our photographers or our staff go when the court says we can line up. Yesterday, people lined up at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Okay.
For this morning?
For this morning. I'm not doing that, and we're not doing that. And honestly, sometimes there's, you know, we don't share scoops, but we do share power strips. The other reporters, you know, we're all in this together. So you get there, you'll see it in the big trials. They hire people to, you know, they actually hire people.
Can I say it's like a concert in some ways where you have line holders.
You bring your chair, you get your coffee, and you sit there. And if you are a registered press person with the court, if they have deemed you to be a journalist or you're with an organization like an NBC or a big company, then the first 10 people in line with people there in the chair get to go in and be inside the courtroom. The overflow goes into an overflow room where you can see from basically what you're seeing at home when you're watching our feed, but you get to be within the courtroom and get an opportunity to talk to the participants. So, you know, part of the reason there's only 10 is because this trial was moved to the smaller courtroom. I don't think the judge loves the media, so I think there's some room for us, Judge Cannoni, behind the pool cameras.
More than 10.
I think that we could fit maybe 12 or 13. And frankly, that would allow all the people who have been covering this every day and before that to get in there. So
because there aren't that many. Is that what you're saying? Press people who are left out.
3 people are left out just about every day, and their feelings are hurt. But at the same time, you know, there's no other way to really do this. And, you know, the question has been, is he a journalist? And the answer is, he is a journalist. You may not believe or support the ideas and ways that he does what he does. But, you know, as someone who was in the alternative press for many, many years and still is in one way, you know, everything is evolving. So let the state judicial Supreme Court decide if he is or he isn't.
All right.
You earned your title of Courtroom Insider tonight.
I did.
Sure. All right, still ahead tonight on Canton Confidential, we're taking your questions and we're asking them of the experts.
Well, this trial has a lot of people talking, not just here in Massachusetts. We'll talk about the international attention on the case. That's coming up next.
Hysterical and pacing around the scene, screaming, "Is he dead?" But that's not all the responders testified to Karen saying at the scene in her emotional utterances. Opposing recollections have dominated discussions this week, and just like everything else in this case, we are left with more questions than answers.
From true crime podcasts to Dateline specials and YouTube deep dives, the Karen Read trial has been dominating conversations online and around the water cooler.
As you know, here at NBC 10 Boston, we have been covering this trial extensively and have viewers from around the country. Today's live stream had viewers from the states highlighted here, as well as Canada, England, and France. But we're not the only ones, as we said, covering this case closely.
We want to bring in Brandy Churchwell. That's the woman you just heard from who is covering the Read case on her podcast, The 13th Juror, Conspiracy in Canton. Brandy, thank you so much for being with us. You live in Florida. You make it clear to your followers you are not a lawyer, but a, quote, justice junkie. You do have degrees in psychology and education. So take us through what drew you to this case.
This is one I love true crime. I follow true crime. I watch trials, but this is one that was really grabbing my attention because of so much differentiation between the stories that you're hearing from one side versus the other. And you know, I'm not a big conspiracy person. I don't really get into conspiracies. But then I started going through court documents because that's where I like for all of my information to come from. And when I started digging into that, there were so many inconsistencies and so many statements that changed and things that didn't make sense to me. And so I kind of started, I just dug right in and dove headfirst to see what was going on.
Well, let's pick up the conversation there. Based on what you saw in those documents pre-trial, compared against what you've seen so far inside the courtroom, are you getting the sense that there's some kind of conspiracy here? I
mean, my thing is, I think that if there is, I have an open mind about everything on both sides. I think that if there is a cover up or conspiracy, that it is not a huge blown up, everybody in the town is in on this type of thing. I think that there have definitely been some issues in the investigation, some huge issues in the investigation. And so I do see that. I am not convinced one way or the other on either side right now. I think one of the big problems, though, and we saw it today when, they were talking about to Nicole Albert about what time her daughter left. And the police report says 12:15. And she said, no, at 2 o'clock. So right off the bat, that tells the jury that either they can't have trust in the witness or they can't have trust in the police. And that's a bad look for the prosecution. So everything is kind of up in the air still, I think.
Brandy, you've studied psychology. Why do you think so many people are captivated by this around the country, as we mentioned?
I think people have latched onto it for different reasons. I think some of it is curiosity. Some of it is, like people are so hardcore on one side or the other. There's very few that are kind of middle ground right now. And I think that everybody's reasons for jumping in are so different, but it's one of those things where it's not so clear cut. It's not, this absolutely happened and there's no question about it. Both sides have parts that don't really make sense. So it's that, whodunit type of thing that you just,
divisive. It definitely is. Brandy Churchwell, thank you so much. Again, she has her podcast, The 13th Juror, if you want to check it out. Thanks for joining us. But after the break, Morgietta joins us again as we wrap up week 2 of testimony.
She'll be answering your questions. Stay with us. All right, Morgietta, we have this question from Jack in Charlton. He asks, why can't we get full days of actual trial? He's asking that question because, of course, there are 2 half days in the trial schedule. But this isn't unusual, is it?
No, it's really not that unusual. And, you know, as big as this case is, there are a lot of other court cases that are happening in the courthouse. And honestly, the jurors need a break, too. You know, it's a lot to consume in a short amount of time.
And it's going to go on for a while. So
Yeah.
you'll get the whole trial. Don't worry, Jack. All right. Morgietta, thank you, as always, for being with us. Week 2 of testimony in the Karen Read trial is over.
Right. We'll be back next week as testimony continues. Until then, have a good night.